So this is, again, comic tutorial part 2. We're going to be talking about character design. So I have quite a few characters that I'm using right now. So I have Skeleton Joe, who is in a children's book series that my husband writes. And we have 4 books and we're trying to write another one, but we just had a baby, so we're going to chill out a little bit on that. And then I have kind of my avatar that I use in my comics on my Instagram, where they're kind of based on my real life. So I have my daughter and my husband show up as well. And then I have my Mindless Muse characters. So I have Aerie, Celeste, and Adeline, and we'll kind of dive into those 3. And sort of talk about what aspects are in them that make them kind of unique, but also simple to draw, because really the biggest thing about character design is keeping it simple, because I see all these amazing artists who don't ever make their comic because they're constantly trying to refine their character design and they have so much detail in it, and it's really about just like trying to simplify it as much as you can and still keeping your characters recognizable, especially when you first start out. Like having this, big magnum opus that you want to make, it's just not functional and it's not going to work well for you, like mentally trying to make this like giant book, when really you could just start making a couple of small comics with some really simple characters and just kind of get going with the flow, and then you can work on your big amazing giant book that you want to write. So we're going to still be using quite a bit of information from Scott McCloud's books. So again, he has Understanding Comics and then Making Comics. So if you want to know more about like the background of comics, read Understanding Comics. And then if you want to know how to make them, he does a deep dive into how to make comics in his second book. So this is pulled from Understanding Comics, where he's talking about the universality of like a character and how we use iconography. So if you think of like emojis and stuff, like they relate to kind of everyone, right? Like that little happy face is so simple, so almost anyone can relate to it. They can see themselves in it. But then when you're looking at that photo of a person, that's just that one person who's going to be able to be like, that's me, right? And then same with like as he goes down, so there's the few people who maybe fit that one face with quite a bit of detail, then the next one, thousands of people will see themselves in that, millions in the next one, and then pretty much everyone sees themselves in the 2 eyes in the mouth. So it's really, there's so much to play with in creating a character, and just kind of finding what works for you and what works, being able to draw this character millions and millions of times, right? Because that's, you can draw one great like concept drawing, but then you have to do that over and over and over and over again, right? So it's great to do like highly detailed renderings of your characters, but try and break them down and make them simple for the comic. That's what the cover artists for. Do something detailed on the cover and then make them really simple and really easy to draw for yourself, because otherwise you're gonna be like, why did I do this? So here's some examples from popular culture. So I've kind of arranged them in most detailed to least detailed. So we have Superman, like originally he was really, really basic, but now he's kind of got like more detail in his face, and a lot of superhero comics have kind of followed this trend where they look very realistic. There's quite a bit of detail in them. And then we have Inuyasha, how he's got like some details. He's got a pretty plain face, but then he has, that little sash and just like kind of nice little things that make him unique, but not like insanely annoying to redraw over and over and over again. And then Sarah Anderson's character, that's just, I believe, just based on her, but I'm sure she doesn't actually look that ratty in person. But really basic, just, big eyes, some hair, but very recognizable, and she draws them very simplistically and very cute. And you can always look at her work and be like, oh yeah, that's Sarah's work. So she has found a nice way to kind of be super simple, but also incredibly recognizable. Like anytime I see a repost of her comics, I'm like, oh, that's Sarah's work. Like, immediately. And then kind of at the very basic, these people don't even have faces. This is XKCD. They've been going on for at least 15 years, I think now, and they just use stick people. And I don't know if like in South Park they talk about how like Simpsons did it, but actually there's a new trend of XKCD did it, because they've been making comics for years and years and years. So it's like, it's highly likely that you're trying to make something that XKCD already did. So I have a couple of notes here, kind of just what I was saying. So, Superman is like the most complicated. He's got like abs. That's kind of hidden by my picture. And then Inuyasha, again, he has like the little details, like his sword is, has some sort of, ornate imagery on it, but the sword isn't always there, right? So it's kind of nice. It adds that little bit of detail, but you don't have to redraw that in every single panel. And same with like his necklace is, very unique, but it also is simple. It's just a couple of circles and some teeth, right? And then his little ears, but the very basic face. Like, Rumiko Takahashi does very, very simple faces. Like, I would love to see just a giant compilation of all her faces because, like, especially in Ranma, they're all so simple, but somehow they're still very unique. And then, yeah, again, like, so simple and clean for Sarah Anderson's work, and then literally stick people. So there's, like, it's so broad. And it's really just what you feel comfortable with, right? Like, for something like Superman, they have lots of artists, so you're not necessarily on that to always be making it. And then they do have, like, letterers and people who, do the shading and stuff, right? So you might just be doing the line work if you were working for a publisher that does Superman comics. But if you're doing something just for yourself and you're doing all of the work, including all the lettering, all the coloring, all the shading, then definitely start simple, because otherwise you're just gonna never get anywhere. Like, I found when I first started out, I was just constantly crumpling up stuff. I was never feeling like it was right, just because you're just, shooting yourself in the foot by making it too complicated and trying to remember all these little details. So then here's kind of an example of my characters. This is 16 years of making comics. So in 2004, it was Stupid Face, and I had kind of an idea of character design a little bit. Like, he had the big nose, which kind of made him a little bit more unique instead of just like a simple face. But he just has that little bit of hair at the top, the little beady eyes, and the mouth that can go all the way around his nose depending on what he was reacting to. So really, really basic, and I was able to like write a million of these comics. I think there were about 30 of them, and they were not good. And I don't have them anymore, thankfully. But I was able to practice, and my friend and I would make these, and we could do them in half an hour. So it was a really great way to just kind of practice and get making the comics instead of just like laboring over the idea of a comic. I was able to bang them out. And then in 2006, this is Becky. She was in an Inuyasha fan comic that I did. But I still am kind of following that idea of like, she has a little bit of a detail, like the little bit of her hair. And then she has like kind of a unique little neckline on her dress, but very basic. And I was able to do 3 volumes of this, I think in like less than a year. They were all done pretty crappily. Like, I was talking about, I should do a comparison of this one, because this is the oldest comic I own of my own work, compared to like my new stuff. In like panel layout, and he's like, well, you have 2 panels a page in that comic. And it's true, especially at the beginning. Like, sometimes it would just be 1 panel on a page and they'd all be like kind of fading and not very well done. But again, it was like great practice, and you look back on it and you're like, well, Erin forgot to draw eyebrows. Eventually she figured it out, but at the time it was just too hard to remember to draw eyebrows, so I just didn't do it. And then 2010 was when I went digitally, so my characters got a little bit more simplistic, and I went that way for a little bit. And then I have Eri from Mindless Muse there in 2015, how she has a very distinct hairline, and we will look at that later too, comparing her to the other characters, but super simple. You can see like you can see that my style kind of became my own later on, but before it was kind of just all over the place. I had this like weird kind of chibi style, and then very like based on Rumiko Takahashi's work, and then kind of based on North American like cartoons like The Simpsons I was really interested in when I started doing Stupid Face. So you can see that kind of like simplistic style coming from there. And then the most recent is like 2020 that I've been doing these comics about myself and my life. And so I've got actually a little bit more realism coming back into it, but it's still extremely basic and very easy to knock back. And I still, like, when I'm drawing myself, people still say, oh, it looks like you. So I must be doing something right, because I still am getting that kind of idea of myself without going overboard. And I hate drawing glasses, so I just was like, I don't wear glasses in comics. But my husband still does, because he doesn't show up as often. So I'm like, I guess I'll draw glasses for him. And so we're going to now look at my Mindless Muse characters. So we have Aerie, Adeline, and Celeste. And I kind of have them arranged from least detailed to most detailed. So that's kind of what Scott McCloud was talking about, how the relatability. So Aerie, I would find, is the most relatable, and that's kind of on purpose too. And then Celeste would be the least relatable because she has a little bit more detail. So people, like, just in like looking at her, you're not going to see yourself in her as easily as someone would look at Aerie, just because she has less going on. So I have some comments I've written about them. So Aerie is kind of goofy and bouncy, and that comes across in her hair and her expression. She tends to be a little bit immature and naive. The only really detail that I don't draw all the time is she has a little scar on her arm, but that's usually hidden by a t-shirt, so it's even less stuff I have to draw every single time. So it's more just like if she's in an action scene, she tends to like gets her shirt like torn because she's just clumsy and goofy. So it'll show up in an action sequence sometimes, but not all the time. And then Adeline, I wanted to go for a really symmetrical kind of look, and she's very dainty, and I hate actually the tips of her hair. They're really annoying to draw. She's all about being symmetrical, right? So everything about her is very kind of dainty and a very like put together, right? Aerie can be messy, and actually Aerie's hair is the most likely to be kind of like put up in different ways, just because she's a little bit more versatile. But Adeline really she likes her hair down. She likes her hair pointed like this. It's just magically like this because she's a princess, and she's like, she's perfect, really, like in that kind of glance at her, right? And then I have Celeste with more of a serious and guarded and unbalanced look. So her hair isn't balanced on both sides. She has the scar on one side. She has the patches, and I hate remembering where her patches on her outfit are, so I'll just draw them wherever. So far, no one has been like, why do her patches move? But if they would ask, I'd just tell them that, oh, she's magical, so the dress is magical. But I do have a little hint of chainmail to kind of just add a little bit of detail to her dress, because it used to be a little too simple, but I was like, I don't want to have to actually draw like chainmail or anything extra, so I just added a little bit right there just to kind of give her a little bit more detail. And Adeline usually is in a princess dress with gloves and her crown, but if she's out in the 21st century, she usually has to dress down, unfortunately. But I like to throw little barrettes in her hair to kind of keep that feminine look to her. So this is kind of just like a basic analysis of my characters. I mean, I am good at drawing fast if I can nail it, and I've been working really hard on nailing these characters. Celeste, I believe, is the oldest one. I've had her since about 2008. She was originally in a NaNoWriMo book that I just gave up. I think I wrote about 15,000 words, so that's not bad, but it was not a good book. So I'm glad that she was able to live on in my comic. And same with Adeline. She was in about 2010. I came up with her in this kind of like drama story about like getting lost at sea. But really they didn't come together and they have such a good vibe, the three of them. They didn't come together until I was starting to do a little webcomic, and I would just have them interacting because I had them as characters. And a professor was like, this seems more interesting than all the like separate stories you have for them. Like, why don't you just do this? So that's kind of how it started, is that they were in this little webcomic living in an apartment together. And that was kind of the basis of Mindless Muse. It's like, yeah, why can't the 21st century be their little hub world, and then they time travel and fight vampires, and they can have all these dramatic stories, but they're all intertwining and a little bit more interesting. And just kind of, they work off each other really well. And if you're kind of trying to think of characters that go together, a good writing idea is to have them in groups of 3, because you can have more drama. So if you just have 2 people, it's a little harder to add drama. And if you have like a giant group, then it's like, think of like the Friends, characters, or that kind of sitcom thing. Like, it's really unlikely for all 6 of them to be having like a cohesive fight. So they're like broken off into little groups. So that's why 3 is a good rule of thumb. If you want to have a little bit of drama, you can have like 2 characters gang up on another one, and it just adds a little bit more there. So if you're trying to think of like a group of characters, a trio is a good way to start, because they can feed off each other without getting like totally like full anarchy. And so I also see this too. A lot of people will create a character and they have this perfect design, but then they don't play with emotions. So this is all of them reacting to one thing, but they all react differently. So that's something to really think about too when you're creating characters. They can't all react the same way to the same thing. They would react differently depending on their history and on their personality, right? So that's sort of something to play around with too, doing like a little style sheet of each emotion and seeing how each character would react to them, right? So like Celeste, because she's this like dainty princess, she kind of has a lot more fear, but Adeline and Aerie have a little bit more experience with stuff, so they're less like frightened and more like disgusted and annoyed at stuff. So I have some notes here too, just kind of saying like Aerie would be surprised and frustrated, Adeline would just be straight up frightened in this scenario, and then like Celeste would be annoyed. She'd be like, why am I dealing with this? So that's something too to play around with, because you want to make your characters unique and they can't all react in the same way, or else it's just gonna be like, well, why is this person here? They could easily replace this person. So you want their personality to come through and you want to play around with them. And again, the simpler you go, the more you can actually emote. Like if you have a super hyper realistic character, you can't do these great dramatic faces because their face just doesn't go that way, right? So you have to think too like how much realism you want, because if you want to make these giant dramatic faces, you have to think like, well, the musculature that you've laid out is just going to look so jarring if you're all of a sudden like making this really goofy face. I mean, unless that's your style. Like I know One Punch Man has some stuff like that too. So if you want to work that in, absolutely, but just trying to think of like what works for you and how do you want these characters to react to stuff, right? Like I love the big emotions. I love being able to like contort characters' faces. But if you really like them to be very realistic and very subdued, then that's absolutely, more power to you. But just like remember, the more serious and detailed you make it, it's the harder it is going to be able to get these like giant dramatic gestures while still looking like it matches your artwork. And so this is just a little bit of like a comparison. So this is the comic that I said where Aerie and Celeste and Adeline were all interacting with each other and living in an apartment. So Celeste has come a long way. She used to have like a stitched up eye. She still had the scar, but oh my goodness, she has gotten a lot better. I have been practicing for a long time. The eye was a problem, I found, because if they do a profile and her eye is shut, then it's not very fun to draw. So that was partly why I opened up her eye, so that no matter which way I drew her, you could still like see her emotions and she could still be just more present instead of just like her mouth would have to do all the work because her eye was like shut. And then this next one is from a couple years later. Still not great. I was so proud of it when I did it, but I'm looking back and I'm like, ooh, I needed some practice. And then this is the final page that ended up in Mindless Muse, the first volume, but it's the first page. So we're going to now look at like the next chapters and see. Really, you can, like, I mean, I was posting the webcomic online and people weren't mean or anything. So you can absolutely just start posting, and it's really nice having this kind of like history to look back on. I love when people post like, I drew this a year ago, look at how much more talented I am now, and it's really great to see how much you improve. And really, as long as you're making, then you're going to be improving, even if you don't see it. That's why it's kind of nice to be able to look back on these, that I have all of them, that I can be like, oh, well, I guess I am a little better. And then the next ones are, so we have chapter 2 here. So I've already been improving a little bit, we're going to kind of dissect this page a little bit more in the next part as well. And then here's chapter 3. And I actually transitioned just after this page, or a couple pages later, to working in Photoshop again. I was originally drawing in black ink, so I actually noticed that my artwork got a little bit more rigid for a bit, and then it kind of came back. So this is like one of the last pages in volume 1, and you can just see the confidence coming back a little bit. And I was playing around with a lot more shading and stuff. So definitely in my webcomic, I've even refined that a little bit better. I have more consistent shading. and it's just a little less laborious than when I was doing it in the comic book, because I was also preparing for an art show at the time too. So it was just, I had a lot on my plate and I wasn't trying to refine my style. I was just trying to get it done. So definitely if I were to do it again, I would have a lot more tools to use to make it better. But, you know, you just gotta do it, right? So here's some examples of my more recent ones. So I have a little bit more backgrounds consistent. I've got a color one here, and I just have like a basic one with, I really love the expression though in the last panel. So that's kind of a good example too of being able to contort your character while still keeping them looking like themselves, right? So I feel like this, you can tell this character is here, and you're not going to get her confused with anyone else. I do draw a lot of Instagram mamas, so I find that I definitely do not resemble them at all in my comics, so it's a good way to kind of make them look different. But like really basic is the way to go, especially if you're starting. Like, you know, do those beautiful concept drawings and then just try to like break them down and make them as simple as possible, just because you really want to just start creating, right? Then that's the big thing, right? So don't get hung up, like character design, it's so easy to get hung up on it, but just bang it out and figure it out, and just start making art, because that's really the way that you're going to get better, right? And just, you know, make it easy on yourself, make some cute little characters.